Freelance comic book creators are the lifeblood of the industry. While publishers are celebrated for the intellectual property they own, it's the work for hire creators developing many of the characters, stories, and milestone moments in comics. Stories about the problems with the work for hire system are common, but the underlying work for hire agreements that form these relationships don't get the attention that matches their impact. My name is Gamal Hennessy, and I'm going to fix that right now by talking about the legal rationale, economic reality, and the basic concepts underlying this type of contract. One of the basic concepts in copyright law is the relationship between the creation and ownership. In most situations, whoever creates an original work owns that work. The work for hire doctrine is an exception to that rule. If a work is made for hire, an employer is considered the author, even if an employee actually created the work. The employer can be a firm, an organization, or an individual, which covers most comic book publishers. Now, under copyright law, a work for hire is created if it's prepared by an employee within the scope of their employment, or a work is specially ordered or commissioned for use in a variety of situations. One of those situations is as a contribution to a collective work. Since comics are arguably a collective work, publishers regularly commission freelance artists using work for hire agreements. Now, while there's plenty of hostility against the work for hire concept, there are benefits to both the publisher and the freelance artist in the context of comics. For the work for hire artists, it's a situation of low risk and low reward. Many comics do not generate a profit, so artists relying on comic book sales to make a living might not be able to sustain themselves. Even if comic sales across the board were healthy enough for artists to survive, the profits for comics don't materialize for months and sometimes years after the work is done and the book is published. Under a standard work for hire agreement, the artist is paid up front, regardless of the sales or profits of the published book. For publishers, the situation is high risk, high reward. Published books are a source of revenue, but in the modern entertainment landscape, the intellectual property based on comics drives film, merchandise, television, and video games. As an extreme example, the revenue from direct market print comics as a whole was about $2 billion in 2017. In 2018, a single film, Avengers Infinity War, generated a worldwide box office of more than $2 billion on its own, not counting merchandise or associated advertising. Check out my video on the wider comic book industry landscape in the show notes to get a better perspective on this issue. Of course, even in the current age of comic book entertainment, only a select few properties cross over into mainstream media, and almost none of the books that do find their way to the various screens and shelves and reach the heights of the current MCU. But copyright ownership gives publishers the potential for success. It is an investment with a substantial risk that the work for hire artists don't lose or profit from either way, depending on the agreement. Now that we've got a better understanding of the position of work for hire agreements in comics, we need to talk about the actual nature of the contract itself. A work for hire agreement defines the rights and responsibilities between an owner who commissions a work and the artist who creates the work. A work for hire agreement is different from an artist collaboration agreement that I talked about in the last video, where two or more parties share in the ownership of intellectual property, or a license agreement, where one side gives another side the right to use some aspect of the intellectual property in exchange for payment. Keep in mind that anyone working on your comic who will not share in the ownership of the intellectual property should sign a work for hire agreement before they start working on the book. While a work for hire agreement will share some of the same foundation and housekeeping terms found in other comic book contracts, there are several basic and business terms unique to this type of agreement. You could check out my overview of the comic book contract with the link in the show notes, but right now, let's take a look at the elements of a work for hire agreement. A well-drafted comic book work for hire contract will address the following issues: the owner of the work for hire artist for the work. Remember that each artist performing services needs to sign a separate agreement with the owner. The work describing the comic in question. This should include as much detail as possible, but at a minimum, it should include the working title, a description of what the final product will be, whether it's a webcomic, single print issue, graphic novel, or ongoing series, and the services the work for hire artist is providing, and the existence of a work for hire relationship. This should include both language defining the relationship and an assignment of all rights to the work in the event a work for hire relationship does not exist for some reason as determined by a court. The delivery schedule describes when the artist will deliver the services. The compensation describes the page rates, hourly rates, royalties, or any combination used to pay the artist. Compensation terms should also include the timing of payments, credit in the final product, ownership of the original artwork, if that's applicable, and the use of the services in the artist's professional portfolio to gain work later on down the line. Advance recoupment refers to any and all payments made before revenue is generated and then deducted from the royalties when the revenue is generated. For example, a work for hire artist might get a page rate for their work on the book before it's published, but that money can get recouped by the owner when the book goes on sale before the artist can get any royalties. Missed deadlines cover any penalties to the artist for missing the delivery schedule, and withdrawal includes any penalties if the artist is unwilling or unable to complete the work. Now, drafting, negotiating, and signing the contracts for your creative project might take some time and cost some money. But if you sign the right contracts up front, you'll save money in the long term and put both you and your book in a better position to succeed. Now, every work for hire scenario is different, so this brief overview isn't legal advice. If you have specific legal questions about a deal you're working on and you'd like to schedule a free consultation, you can find the link to my website in the notes and on the screen. If you'd like to find out more about the business and legal side of comics in general, you can join the Comics Publishing Institute with the other link in the notes and on the screen as well. Until next time, have fun with your comics.